Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session of LitFestx. We have with us Sidin Vadukut. He is a columnist, journalist, blogger. He has an engineering degree from NIT Trichy and an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. Sidin is currently also an editor with the Mint Business newspaper. And apart from that, he, of course, writes for other publications regularly as well. He's got a trilogy called the the Dog Trilogy of books, which has done very well. And last year, his book titled The Skeptical Patriot also opened to good reviews in India. Today, we've got him for a no-holds-barred session on being skeptically patriotic. And Sidin, welcome to the show.
Hi, yeah, great fun. Let's do this.
Yeah. So, you're currently in UK, and of course, you've taken a very irreverent yet in-depth look at a lot of the things that India is known for, that Indianness is all about, and tell us a little bit more about sort of your own research and the way then you looked at the lighter or the fun or the more irreverent side of those facts or let's say cliches about India.
No, I'd always found the every Independence Day, every Republic Day, somebody'd send you a WhatsApp message saying be proud you're Indian because of XYZ, and like most people, I'd always generally treated it with not even skepticism. It was even worse. I treated it with derision when I got those messages. You think like, yeah, these lists would remain static for 15 years. You'd see the same thing. It would keep coming in, and then eventually, what happened was somebody at Drupa called me up and said, "Do something on nonfiction." And literally, as I was speaking to her, I got one of these messages on WhatsApp. As I was speaking to her, and I was thinking, you know what? Let me fact check some of these. This is exactly how it started. I said, let me fact check some of these. However, when I started, I was more of a cynic than a skeptic. And what actually changed my mind was my wife said, look, if you're going to approach this and you want to do an honest job of it, don't approach it assuming it's right or wrong. Approach it as if you want to really, approach these questions wanting to know more about them, completely open-minded. And I said, you know what? I thought she made complete sense, because if you approach a lot of these questions, because a lot of them it's very difficult to pin down concrete answers for them. You can approach them very cynically and very negatively and come out learning nothing, having called a lot of people idiots, feeling smug about it and coming out, And then I decided very early on that I wouldn't do that. I'd approach it. I'm not a historian, even though now I've just joined an MA program here in historical research, and hopefully some point that will give me bona fide credentials. But at that point when I started, I was basically a curious person with access to a lot of libraries. That's how I started, which has its pluses and minuses. Pluses being, you tend to get lots of anecdotes. The book is full of anecdotes. It's a very anecdotally driven book of historical essays. The downside to that is it genuinely doesn't have the academic rigor a lot of actual work by good historians would have. But then, my thinking is like this. If you're writing a book on history, on any history, Indian or any history, it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be synthesis, in which case you're going to bring together lots of research done by people and tell a good story, or it's going to be revisionist in some way. And I know revisionism is a bad word in general, but I think it's a good thing. Because if you're a historian, either you retell stories in more accessible ways, if you're a popular historian, or you find out new things. And if you find out anything new in some level, you're going to revise some aspect of history. So you have to do one of those two things. So my first book was synthesis, largely. I didn't find out anything new. What I generally did was take a lot of research. Some of it was actually very disparate. It was broken up in many places. I brought it together in a book, and I think this is why it's probably done well, that is not confrontational. The book doesn't go out to call patriots idiots or idiots patriots or any of those things. That's how it starts off. My goal now is to learn enough history that I can do revisionist work. And by revisionist, I don't mean proving Nehru was not A but B, or not Gandhi was not A but B, but genuinely trying to enrich our understanding of where we come from, why are we the way we are. India has way more history than most countries can deal with. Because if you look at very few countries really have the richness of history we have. So yeah, so my book genuinely, it started off as a cynical project, but I think it ended up as a really satisfying exercise in approaching Indian history with skepticism.
So
satisfying to me. I can't speak for readers.
Huh? And no, I'm sure it is satisfying for the readers as well, in varying degrees, of course. So coming to some of your research and the way you presented it in a very fun, irreverent way. What were some of the memorable, or the key sort of myths, or the key so-called facts which you then found to be on a lighter side, not as true or not as relevant to us as a country?
Like I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll tell you one very satisfying experience. So there's the chapter on the zero. And the zero is it was a fun chapter to write because inventing the zero is kind of like discovering the color red. It's just there. What does the idea that India invented the zero even mean? So I had to start from there. But what was really satisfying for me, I'll tell you a moment which I just felt really nice, was a large part of the chapter talks about this temple in this Chaturbhuja temple in Gwalior, where there is this inscription which many people till very recently believed was the first kind of example of zero being used in the modern sense, which is both as a numeral and as a placeholder. I don't want to go into details, but numbers have, or numbers do multiple things, not just, today we kind of take it for granted, but numbers and numerals play different roles. Anyway, so the thing was, I'd find references to this inscription all over the place, but only bits and pieces. I'd never find, everyone would keep and this is one of the problems with working with a lot of Indian history, is that everyone refers to other people's references to other people. Very rarely do you find this is the inscription in the temple in its raw form. And this is from where, so there's this inscription of the zero, and I was desperately looking for the original. And after a lot of hunting, I'd actually given up. That I thought that I'd actually end up doing one of those kind of difficult, somewhat half-hearted things, which is I found it in his book, he found it in that fellow's book, and that fellow originally discovered it. So you're basically going by hearsay to prove what you're saying. And then at the London Library, which is this private library in London, I actually discovered a first edition copy of the first time the temple inscription was translated into English, along with the original hand stenciled copy, which was published in this collection of epigraphs of Indian history and so on. And I got a first edition copy. And I was finally able to actually look at what it looked like when people actually first got that inscription. Similarly, there's another inscription I talk about in the book, which is perhaps the most important inscription in terms of the history of the Cholan expeditions to Southeast Asia. Almost everything we know about their expedition comes from one inscription in the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur. And it is ridiculous because everyone talks about this inscription, but to actually find a full English translation of it is a total pain in the ass. And again, I found it because I didn't find it, but I found that the library had a copy of it. And this is super interesting. This is really, really satisfying. On the other hand, the stuff that is really funny, and you kind of, like, for example, plastic surgery. I completely went in thinking the fact that plastic surgery was invented in India is this complete random construction. And then you start reading, and then there's a fairly strong case there. I mean, there is no chapter which says 10 on 10, this is true. But that was really satisfying, really interesting, very, very counterintuitive, and a completely difficult chapter to write because it wasn't a case of you finding an ancient manuscript in India which says, look, plastic surgery happens. It was there in a copy of the Sushruta Samhita, but then you also had an example of somebody actually doing a rhinoplasty in Pune, which was reported in a magazine in London. But then for over 20 years, there's been an argument over who the actual author of that article. So you had to kind of build all these things together. So that was satisfying because it proved me wrong. The zero was satisfying because I was able to get something that I don't think anyone is actually, for many years, I don't think, at least in popular history, anyone is actually opened. I'd pick up books from libraries which hadn't been checked out for over 40 years.
Wow.
You'd find a library book that the last time anyone looked at it, I found a book which was the last time it was picked out was in 1953. I was the first person to take it out of the library since then, So that
And
was
this was
amazing.
a library in India?
No, in London.
Wow.
In general, London is actually a far better place to do a lot of work on Indian history than India. I mean, you find all kinds of stuff. Also, because the British, I think, kind of meticulously would send one copy to the archives in Calcutta and another copy to the archives in London. So between the Foreign Office, the British Library, and some private libraries, you get very good access. So that was very helpful. My book would have been different if I'd written in India. So that's a fact. That's an important fact. It would have sounded very different. Then I think the last example I can give of something really funny was the chapter on Sanskrit and computer programming. That was interesting, not because of the fact itself, but because of how that fact has got a second life, because of the fact that you can really see how it's a story from the early to mid 80s, and that was kind of forgotten. And then as soon as the internet comes, and a lot of particular style of Indian engineers in the US start getting the internet, this myth gets this, not myth, but that idea that Sanskrit is good for computer programming gets this massive second life, entirely because of the internet. You generally just don't see a lot of talk about it before. So that was interesting. And that also, I enjoyed that bit because you can actually trace back an explosion of interest in Indian achievements because of the internet. Massive. You can actually trace it. You could take a fact, put it into Google and trace it back through time, through website to who first put it up on the web. You can actually do stuff like that. So yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, there are so many things I could go on about. What I really learned was not just the fact that it was true or false, but why people believe in it, how people spread it, how the Sanskrit in computing massively popular with, for example, blogs belonging to Indian students in the US, very big. The fact that NASA has many Indians, on the other hand, is not as popular in US as it is in India. So you find all it's very interesting. I find these patterns very interesting. Why do we believe what we believe?
So very interesting point you mentioned. In one of your own fact-finding mission and how it led you to either confirm or negate some theories. But very interestingly, when you say that how people believe what they believe, so it's not so much about the fact itself, but as you discovered, it is the different connections and communities or regions, not just geographical regions, but even on the internet, different groups, how they interact with each other, and those facts keep getting propagated into reality.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit more about some of these nuances which you found on certain theories being more subscribed to by certain groups of people, and why.
Yeah. No, I think I've written about this once before. There's a very fundamental thing I realized very quickly, is that for a certain group of young Indians, and I think especially perhaps people who are old enough, people who are young enough to enjoy the liberalization generation. So I don't mean people born in the 90s, but people born to adulthood in the 90s. People who achieved adulthood in the 90s, started enjoying the benefits of that. People who start moving abroad, studying. I think what's happened is for a lot of these people, they don't have a concrete sense of what it means to be Indian in the 21st century. There is a genuine lack of, I'm not saying that we don't have stuff to be proud of. We have lots of things to be proud of, but there isn't a concrete sense of what these things are. I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, so much of what it means to be Indian today is, like I mentioned this during a Reddit Ask Me Anything a couple of weeks ago. It broadly divides into two groups, the BJP or the right-wing group, or a lot of right-wing people. Again, I'm kind of stereotyping and generalizing, but is that we have to take pride in things that came before colonialism. We need to find things from the Vedic period or from the ancient period or the classical period to be proud of. On the other hand, the counter argument, which is not just Congress, but a lot of other people are, no, let's find things from the post-colonial period to be proud of. Republic, democracy, law and order, whatever it is, or lack of, whatever it is. Those are the things we need to be proud of. So there is a genuine, because our school textbooks, I don't think, our school textbooks don't give young Indians a sense of what it means to be Indian. I think mass media does not give young Indians a sense of what it means to be Indians. I think our politicians don't give Indians a sense of what it means to be. So we've started looking for validation of our national identity in lots of other places, which is why these things have become so strong. Which is why, for example, the idea of Sanskrit being a good language for programming is just immediately picked up without a lot of thought about, is it actually true? I mean, what you find fascinating is you'd find websites of professors in the US, Indian professors in the US, who are working in extremely complicated science or whatever, I mean, technical areas, but showing utter lack of skepticism when they're republishing ideas of Indian greatness. Suddenly they don't want to show, they just want to believe. People just want to believe things that make them feel good about themselves. And I think this different societies, different communities approach this in different ways. I mean, if you're if you're from like my parents, for example, would find different things to be proud of as Indians. Young people want different things to be proud of as Indians. And the good thing, what the really interesting thing about these, I only tackle around 10 Indian myths in my book, or Indian statements of Indian greatness in my book. But if you look at the longer list, you'll realize that these lists are actually very interesting. There are some which are science tech legends, which are satisfying to younger people. There are some about ancient wealth and greatness that are satisfying to some other group of people. So we all want things to be proud of, and we don't find it. We don't find it in everyday life. I mean, media is very negative. I think in general, discourse about Indian history has become very confrontational. So people just feel like it's a gap, it's a vacuum, it's a genuine vacuum, and people want ways to fill it. And if they don't find truth for filling, they will find semi-truths to fill it. That's what's happening. That's my view.
I think you're right to a certain extent that clearly, the recent times, we haven't had too many things to write very proudly about, right? So whether it is sports or arts or culture, or military prowess, or economic or financial indicators, so we keep having to go back to numbers or quotes or so-called facts of pride from many decades ago, or sometimes even centuries ago, and talk about the then greatness of India. Tell me, with the fact that now we have so many more Indians staying abroad and doing well, there's a new understanding of India which has been generated by these folks in the countries they live in the jobs they undertake. Like you mentioned, senior professors at universities, doctors, nurses, scientists, certainly NRI businessmen, so on and so forth. So are you seeing, and you're, given the fact that you're in the UK, obviously interacting with a lot of these people, and being a successful NRI yourself there, are you seeing the narrative changing a little? Are you seeing the perception changing a little?
There is less. Indians abroad are always proud of being Indian, even if they were completely not proud of India. They're always seen as two different things. Being Indian was one thing, being from India was another thing. It's a very odd thing. I mean, it's a nation state versus state, think about it in political theory or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I remember at least it's changed a lot. I mean, there's less eye rolling about India now. Of course, this is all very precarious. Right? It takes a lot to make Indians feel good about India. It doesn't take much for Indians to start feeling bad again about India. It's a very, it's kind of loaded in one direction. No, I'm seeing a lot. There's a little more optimism. There's a little more. I feel there is less cynicism. There's less generally vague. There's this generally vague. Oh, India. Oh, how it is back home. There's a little less of that now. There's a little more. And I think I'll tell you my feeling. It has to at least partly do with the elections, and not because Modi is making a lot of people feel less cynical and less negative, but I think also partly because what's happened in the very recent past is that there's a growing nuanced understanding of how the Indian government functions. It's no longer this mysterious black box where votes go in the one end and bullshit comes out of the other. There is a much more nuanced sense of, no, seriously. I mean, there is, I think, a more nuanced sense of government. People want to know. The other day, I was having dinner with a group of friends, and one of the a good friend of mine on Twitter. He was telling us about power policy. And I learned more about Indian power policy in those 30 minutes over chicken, chettinad, and steamed rice than I have of anything I've read. So he's just obsessed with power policy. He's not a power guy. He works for a consulting firm. He has nothing to do with power. So suddenly, there's a lot more interest in specific things. It's become easier to tell a counter good story to a bad story, which was a lot more difficult before, sometimes. You could vaguely say brick country, economy is growing faster, but now we can say, look, we're doing stuff on Aadhaar, we're doing stuff on railways. There's more. Again, like I said, it's all very risky. It'll take Indians abroad and in India are only one scam away from completely giving up on the country. One scam. You just need one bad scam and it'll be like, oh, you know how it is back home. That's changing. I think that's changing for the better. But again, like I said, I think what does it mean to be Indian? People will give you a lot of answers. They'll give you cultural answers. They'll give you lots of answers. What does it mean to be? What does India mean to me, you, anybody? More difficult answer. And that the gap will narrow I think, and I'm not a sociologist or an expert on this, that gap will narrow as people see India becoming more and more a functional country. As India does things better, suddenly the gap between, look, I am amazing because I'm Indian, but India is dysfunctional because God only knows why. But as that dysfunction goes away, because you can always blame too many poor people, too many this, too many that. But as that gap goes away, I think it'll be better. It'll improve. It's difficult. We're a young country, man. I mean, we are unfortunately in the situation, like, for example, some of the countries in Eastern Europe, tremendous history, unbelievable, I mean, almost a burden, but a very young country. So we have very small shoulders loaded with very many large boxes full of history. So it'll take some time. I think, we need to be patient. And one of the lessons I learned was just have to be really patient. And I think one of the lessons that a lot of people on the right, where Modi supporters, are also learning. Government is complex. It's difficult. But again, let's see. I know that's a roundabout answer to your question, but yeah, let's see.
Absolutely. And certainly, there's a lot of good noise being generated, and I think people are just holding on to hope and a belief that some of this noise, some of this vibe actually gets translated to some action on the ground, and they can get to see some results.
Yeah. I mean, I've always believed that if you ask any political party in India, any genuinely, even not even genuine, remotely sincere politician in India, what his top 10 priorities for India are, I think 8 out of 10 for, if you asked all the political parties in India to give a list of top 10, I think 8 out of 10 would be common for everybody. I think there's genuine sense. I mean, we're looking at low-hanging fruit in terms of, reform. There is a lot of optimism, which is very important. I think it's because the media narrative is so relentlessly negative that the optimism kind of sets it. Keeps, because the moment overall narrative falls, it becomes negative. I think it just creates a lot of disincentives for people within the government system. Suddenly you'll have people thinking, boss, anyway, the system is not working. Why should I be this one Amar Jawan Jyoti who's sacrificing everything for the country? So I think it's good. The optimism is good. The interest in government is very good. Again, one good thing I like is the fact that people are being specifically optimistic and specifically pessimistic, which is much more important, useful than being generally optimistic and generally negative. It's very, very important.
One very important thing you mentioned, Sidin, is that of late the media narrative, very rightly so, has become just very, very, very negative. And to a certain extent, at some points in time, it is fine. But for prolonged periods, if you have that level of skepticism and negativity in general media built in, like you rightly said, why just politicians? Even entrepreneurs, businessmen, professionals will, could one fine day just say, to hell with this. If nothing's going to happen and it is clear we are, headed for doomsday, then let's just throw our hands up and just relax.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, but to be slightly, I mean, I'm not trying to justify Indian media at all, even though I am an insider, in a manner of speaking. All media, I mean, in general, globally, media is negative. In general, it is if economics is the dismal science, then I think media is the dismal art. I mean, it is very I don't know if it's a TRP thing or, if it's, people watch disaster movies because they just like watching the world die. I don't know if it's because of that. In India, I think there are also very specific reasons, because I sense the fact that outrage is the single most liquid currency in Indian media right now. It's the one that draws the most people, and you cannot generate. It's very difficult to generate outrage from positive stories. Very easy to generate outrage from negative stories. And outrage is the cheapest form of getting traffic. If you're a website, the cheapest way of getting traffic. And the good thing is also, outrage is also very secular, not in the problematic sense. It's very secular in the sense that it's very easy to generate. An inaccuracy in a story is outrage. Wrong photo with right story is outrage. Spelling mistake also creates, and it's so easy. On the other hand, to draw enough people through a bang-on positive story is very, very hard. So, and in media people, it's a business. I find it somewhat sad when people say, no, but you guys need to get off your high horse. Boss, the only people, according to me, who think that media occupy the high horse are media people themselves. I don't think the mass public thinks that it's any pillar of democracy or something. We need to stop looking at it that way, because it doesn't function that way. Indian media long ago lost its incentive to be honest and have high quality and so on. If it is honest and high quality, it's largely because of institutional memory or because there are some editors who care. Otherwise, it doesn't function that way anymore. So yeah, the pessimism is very hard. It's very difficult to break, especially in a country like India, where India has specific problems, right? It's very difficult for you to know if your government is working well. Very difficult. How do you know if your government is working well? Because even if the government does something correctly in Delhi, it will take 6 months to a year before you begin to see positive impacts in Trivandrum or in Madurai or wherever. Very hard. However, it's very easy to be negative. Super easy. Oh, they're not protecting writers. Finished. So it's so good things need to be quantified. Takes longer time. Bad things can just be an emotional response. It's difficult. It's complex. And I think one of the things we need to. No, it's difficult. I was thinking one of the things. In one way, I like it when when governments seem immune to. Governments have to have a certain thick skin about media.
Yeah.
Have to. On the other hand, they cannot be thick-skinned to the extent that they stop responding at all.
True. True.
Which unfortunately, it requires a 21st century approach to media, which cannot be handled by ministries who are stuck in the 1980s or the 20th century way of functioning. Which is why, I've always wondered, the BJP, and in fact, Narendra Modi himself seemed far more adept at handling media before he became Prime Minister. And seems to find it a lot more difficult after, largely because the media apparatus in the government works in a particular way. But anyway, it's a digression, but I'm just telling you, it's difficult. Handling the media narrative is very difficult. 1.3 billion people, all of whom have at least 3 to 4 ideas to change the way India functions.
Sure. So, Sidin, we've just about come to the end of the session. I'm seeing.
I know I was giving you rambling answers, but I hope it was useful.
No, but it's good fun. And so, I'm seeing a few questions coming for you on our Twitter feed. Yeah. I'm just going to, just pick one up which you can respond to. So this one is by Punni Pandey, and she says, how far have you succeeded in breaking myths and notions against India and Indians as a person?
It's very difficult because I can't tell you. I think in some ways, I think in a subset of people, I've made them not be afraid of asking for sources, I feel. I also think for a small group of people, I've given, because some people are afraid of digging too much into Indian history because they're afraid that bad things will come out of it.
Right.
Horrible stories will come out of it. Unprideworthy, I'm just making up a word, will come out of it. And I think to some extent, I've helped some people move away. But it's a big challenge. When I applied for my MA, they said, what is your ultimate life goal? And I said, if I can become the first of a new generation of Indian historians who want to approach this in a slightly more apolitical, it's difficult, all history is political, but in a slightly more apolitical way. And then I think my life is a job well done. I'd be very happy if I can do that. So I think so. It's changing. I'm a skeptic. I used to be a cynic, but now I'm a skeptic. A cynic in the sense I'm no longer pessimistic. I'm a skeptic in the sense that I'm approaching everything with a sense of skepticism, but I have a healthy I have a tremendously greater appreciation for Indian history today. I cannot tell you how much more. I mean, to give you an example, we think of how much is that. To give you an example of how much is that, I was reading a book recently where the author said that he's going to ignore a particular empire. I think one of the Chalukyas, Eastern or Western. He said, I'm going to ignore it because they were only around for 400 years. You know what I mean? They were only around for 400 years, so it's different. They're not particularly important in the larger scheme of Indian things. Just imagine.
So on that note, Sidin, we'll bring the session to an end. But wonderful chatting with you, and I'm sure you will do good as a modern day historian, and certainly bring to light some of our glorious historic past in a different light.
Our historic past. Let us hope it is glorious. Huh?
Yes, let's hope it's glorious. Absolutely, absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Sidin. And if you have a message about LitFestx and a platform for our viewers, we'd be very happy.
Oh no, this is I think this is the future. I think I'm somebody who believes that writers need to engage with audiences, but more than engage with audiences, writers need to answer questions about their work, especially non-fiction writers, because it's very easy to write a good book, filter out the bad reviews, look at only the good reviews, get the pats on your back and go. And in non-fiction, especially in India today, there is a tremendous need for non-fiction writers to engage with their audience in non-confrontational ways. And social media is very difficult. This is much more useful. So good job. I mean, I think more people should do it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sidin, and wish you all the success with your MA and all the other writing you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.